Today we're going to talk about graphing with x and y intercepts and exactly what does it mean when we're talking about x and y intercepts. If you'll look on the page, you'll see that we've got some definitions. An x-intercept is a point, a comma 0, where the graph intersects the y-axis. So the x-intercept is where you touch the y-axis, and that is an ordered pair. The x-intercept is where you touch the x-axis. I think I said that wrong. So it's the point, so it's an ordered pair point where you touch the x-axis. The y-intercept is the point 0, comma b, where the graph intersects the y-axis. So this is where you touch the y-axis. Now, don't let the a comma 0 and the 0 comma b throw you off. It just means that, remember when we've graphed before, if we've landed right on the x-axis, then we've had an ordered pair that is a number comma 0. And if we've landed right on the y-axis, we've had an ordered pair that was 0 comma a number. So don't let that part throw you off. But if you're just looking at a graph, if I ask you for a graph, I'm going to use a different color so that we can kind of see. I'm going to circle the points. If I ask you for the x-intercept, remember this is my x-axis and this is my y-axis. So you look on the x-axis, and we are touching the x-axis right there at that point that I've got circled. So that would be 4, comma 0. Okay? The y-intercept is over here on the y-axis, and I've circled that point, the y-intercept. So this is my x-intercept. My y-intercept would be 0, comma 3, because that's where I'm touching the y-axis. Okay? Alright, so let's look at the one below it. Let's do the same thing. For my x-intercept, go along the x-axis, and I'm touching right there. So that looks like it's going to be negative 3, comma 0. And for my y-axis, I'm touching right there. Now this one is in between 1 and 2. So I like to use decimals for those. So that's about, oops, sorry, I was about to write it wrong. I'm going over 0. So that should be 0 for my first number, and then I'm going up to about 1.5, so I'm going to call it 1.5. Alright, so here we've got different lines. Now these are not lines that the one on the left here, that is not a line that we are graphing in 098. That is something that you will see later on, but we can look at it and tell if we've got x-intercepts or not. And you can see with this line, I've got a number of times that I'm crossing the x-axis. Actually, there's 3 of them. So I'm crossing the x-axis at over to negative 2, 0. I'm touching at 1, 0. And I'm touching at 4, 0. So there were a lot of x-intercepts on that one. For a y-intercept, I'm just touching it in one place right here. Looks like that's 0, comma 4. Alright, let's look at this next line. This next line is a special line we're going to talk about in a few minutes, and it's a horizontal line. I am looking at my x-axis. Do you see that line touching the x-axis at all? No. So there's no x-intercept. But now it's crossing the y-axis, and it's crossing the y-axis there at that 3. So that would be 0, comma 3. Now the opposite happens when we have a vertical line. You can see on the vertical line, I am touching the x-axis, and I'm touching it at 2, comma 0, right there. But I'm not touching the y-axis at all on this one, so there's no y-intercept on this one, because I don't touch the y-axis at all. You can't have an intercept if you don't touch the axis. Alright, so here's a picture. I'm going to give you a few seconds and see if you can write down. On the left side, let's go ahead and fill in this blank. I've got the x-intercept. They've got the x-intercept right there at negative 3, 0. The y-intercept then, I'm going over 0 and up 1, so that would be 0, 1. Alright, so you, while I'm labeling, why don't you try the x-intercept and the y-intercept for this next one. I'll circle. Alright, hopefully for x-intercept you wrote down 3, 0. And for the y-intercept you wrote down 0, negative 1, because those would be the correct answers. Now, suppose we're not given a graph, suppose we're given an equation, and I'm asked to find the x and y intercepts. Well, we have a process to find the x and y intercepts, and what we're going to do is to find the x-intercept, we're going to put in 0 for y and solve for x. To find the y-intercept, we're going to put in 0 for x, and we're going to solve for y. So in the first one, we're going to put in a 0 for y and solve for x. The next one, we're going to put in a 0 for x, and we'll solve for y. And then a lot of times they like you to do one extra point. So I'll just put a 1 there, and that way you've got 3 points on your graph to line up. But to find our x and y intercepts, we're doing this graph. And so each time I have my class, my on-ground class, I will have them make a little chart, because you won't be given this chart every time if I ask you to find x and y intercepts, but I have them make their own little t-chart and put their zeros in there and fill it in to get me my intercepts. It's just kind of a visual to help you remember what to do. So if I'm going to find my x-intercept first, I'm going to put in a 0 for y. So 2x minus 0 equals 5. So then 2x equals 5. Divide by 2. X equals 5 halves, which is 2 goes into 5 2 times with 1 left over, so that's 2.5, or we're going to put 2.5. Okay. If I put in 0 for x, I'm going to get my y-intercept, so 2 times 0 minus y equals 5. Now, the 2 times 0 goes away. Don't forget to bring down that minus sign with your y, because it's still with it, so I need to divide both sides by -1. So that's going to give me y equals -5. So -5 goes with my 0, so that would be my y-intercept. And then I've got an extra point, it's a checkpoint really. So I'm going to put in a 1 for my x, so 2 times 1 minus y equals 5. So 2 minus y equals 5. I need to subtract 2 from both sides. So -y equals 3. And then divide by our -1. So y equals -3. So that's just our checkpoint to make sure we're really in line. So 2.5 comma 0 would be over to in between the 2 and the 3, and then up 0. 0, -5 would be over 0 and down 5. And then our checkpoint 1, -3. And you can see that those line up. And we are going to line them up, draw my line, and make my arrows. So I've just now graphed using the x and y intercepts. So in the past we've used a table to graph, and now we've got a second way that we can graph using our x and y intercepts. So we have some options for graphing. Alright, so let's try this one. Find the x and y intercepts and graph the equation. So I'm going to put a 0 in for y to get the x-intercept, a 0 in for x to get the y-intercept, and we'll do a checkpoint of, now this has got a fraction with it, so let's do a checkpoint, let's do multiples of 4 so that we can get a nice whole number. So if I'm going to put in a 0 for y, so 0 equals 1 for x, multiply both sides times 4 so that I can clear my fraction. So 0 equals x. So 0, 0 is going to be my x-intercept. Now it says to put in a 0 for x, and what's going to happen again? Y equals 1 4 times 0. I'm just going to get 0 again. So sometimes you may plug in your zeros and get the same exact 0, 0 point for your x and your y-intercept. That's why I have these next two blanks, because I need to find other points to be able to form a line. So if I put in a 4, y equals 1 4 times 4, so those would cancel and I would get a 1, and then y equals 1 4 times -4, and that's going to give me -1. That just gives me other points so I can draw my line, because if I just have 0, 0 here, then that's not really helping me a whole lot to draw a line, and that's what ended up happening for both my x and y intercepts. So I'm going to go over here to 4 and then up 1, and then over to -4 and down to -1. That gives me points to be able to connect to make my line. So don't be thrown off if you get 0, 0 for each of them. You just need to go back to making the table and choose some points. Okay, so the ordered pair 5, 0, is that going to be an x-intercept or a y-intercept? Well, think about it. If you were going to graph 5, 0, you'd be going over to 5 and then up 0. That sits on the x-axis, so that's got to be the x-intercept. The ordered pair 0, 4, you're going to be sitting at the origin and then going up 4. That sits on the y-axis, so that's got to be the y-intercept. Alright, at the bottom here on number 12, we need to come up with our x and y intercepts. So again, what I have my class do is I have them come up over here and I have them make their 0, 0 table. On the example, they just plugged in their zeros. Perfectly fine. It's just sometimes people like to see a visual. And you've worked on tables. You've been doing homework where you've had to make tables. So if I'm going to put in a 0 for y, I'm going to have 3x minus 2 times 0 equals 6. So that goes away. So 3x equals 6. Divide by 3. So x equals 2. So 2, 0 would be my x-intercept. Now I'm going to put in a 0 for x. So 3 times 0 minus 2y equals 6. 3, 0, that zero's out. So minus 2y equals 6. Divide by -2. So y equals -3. If you're asked for a checkpoint, you can make a checkpoint, or we can just go right over here to the graph and put in our 2 zeros. So over 2 up 0 would be right there. 0, -3 would be over 9 down 3, and then we can connect these two, and they would be, that would be my graph using my x and y intercepts. Okay. The last thing we need to talk about are horizontal and vertical lines. So we have worked on our standard form. Remember, ax plus by plus c. That I told you at the very beginning when we talked about graphing that a lot of times you would see your equations ax plus by equals c. That is standard form. You can see here we've put in a 0 for x and we've worked it out. We put in a 0 for y and we've worked it out. So let's see what happens when we do this. This is standard form. Let's work this one out. If I have a 0x, then I've got 4y equals -12. Divide both sides by 4. So y equals -3. If I have a 0 for y, then I would have 2x equals 8 divided by 2. So x equals 4. So sometimes you might start out with just the part 4y equals -12, and I would ask you to graph that. So if I asked you to graph that, you'd have y equals -3. Well, there's no x there. So when we go to make a table, that could be confusing. We're going to talk about that in just a second. Same thing could happen. You could just have 2x equals 8. That's all I could give you, and I'd ask you to graph it. Well, the only thing you could do would be divide by your 2 to get your x equals 4. But again, that seems a little confusing to graph. So let's think about that for a second. When I have y equals -3, that means that I don't have anything else to work. If I were making a chart, no matter what, y is -3, because that's what my equations tell me. Y is -3. So I could put anything in here for x, 0, 1, and 2. Y'all like to put in those numbers. But no matter what, my y is -3. Well, let's graph this and see what kind of line we get. If I go 0, -3, that's over 0, down to -3. If I do 1, -3, over right 1, down to -3. If I do 2, -3, over to 2, and then down 3. And you can see when I connect those lines, that is a horizontal line. And it passes through You guessed it, negative 3. So if you have a y equals negative 3, it passes through negative 3 on the y-axis. That's important because it was y equals negative 3. It passes through negative 3 on the y-axis. Okay, let's look at one if we have x. So what this x equals 4 is telling me that no matter what, x equals 4, I could have, let's do negative 2, 0, and 5. Doesn't matter what I have for y. I have x as being 4. So let's graph it and see what happens. So over to 4, down to negative 2. Over to 4, up 0. Over to 4, up 5. So then when I connect those, you will see I have a vertical line. And it passes through you guessed it, 4 on the x axis because x was equal to 4. So that's how you can deal with horizontal. You're going to get a horizontal or vertical line if you have x equals a number or y equals a number. So if you have y equals a number, I'm going to say y equals a. That's going to be horizontal. If you have b equals, let's do x equals a, you're going to have a vertical line. So down here on number 14, we've got y equals 1, graph it. So I'm going to draw a little graph. If I have y equals a number, I know that that's going to be a horizontal line through, remember this is my y-axis, through 1, because y equals 1, and I know it's going to be a horizontal line. I don't really have to plot any other points. If I'm doing it by hand, I can just draw me a horizontal line, and there's y equals 1. You can see on the example they did, x equals 2. They marked the 2 on the x-axis and then drew a vertical line through 2. You have to go through and draw the actual lines on these. You can't just draw the one dot. You have to draw a line and make it either horizontal or vertical. So it says identify the x and y intercepts on this particular line. Well, for my x-intercept, I'm not touching the x-axis at all. It's going through the y-axis. My y-intercept is up at the 0, 1. And that's how we deal with horizontal and vertical lines. Have a great day.